Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. A major update on former President Trump's legal cases. The judge in Trump's New York criminal case has agreed to delay the sentencing until at least September 18th. This follows yesterday's Supreme Court decision on presidential immunity. The High Court found that presidents have absolute immunity for core presidential duties. Trump's lawyers challenged the former president's conviction following the Supreme Court ruling. The DA said he doesn't agree with Trump's argument, but is open to delaying the trial. Trump was initially scheduled for sentencing on July 11th. The delay means that Trump won't be sentenced before the Republican National Convention later this month. But September is far closer to Election Day. This could put the issue top of mind for voters just as they seriously tune into the race. Later in the show, we'll have a panel to unpack what this decision means for the case and Trump's campaign. Hurricane Beryl is hurtling toward Jamaica after earlier making landfall in the southeast Caribbean, killing at least 6 people. Beryl is now a very strong Category 4 with sustained winds of 155 miles per hour, just shy of the Category 5 threshold. It was the earliest Category 5 on record in the Atlantic.
The National Hurricane Center forecasts that the storm will start losing intensity today, but still be near major hurricane strength through Friday. Beryl will pass near Jamaica on Wednesday, the Cayman Islands on Thursday, and Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula on Friday. It's expected to bring life-threatening winds and storm surge to Jamaica. A hurricane warning is in effect for the nation. While Hurricane Beryl doesn't pose a major threat to the U.S., experts predict it will eventually impact oil prices. That's because the National Hurricane Center is forecasting a shift in the storm's path that could disrupt oil refineries in Texas. Experts also expect Hurricane Beryl to shut down oil tankers, sending crude to Gulf Coast refineries. And that loss of Mexican oil could temporarily boost gas prices. U.S. oil prices climbed above $84 a barrel today for the first time since late April. Experts are predicting a spike of 5 to 10 cents a gallon over the next week.
The White House defending President Biden's record and his intention to run as they hold the first press conference after the debate. That says a new Supreme Court ruling on presidential immunity is allowing former President Trump to delay his New York sentencing. NTD's White House correspondent Iris Tao reports.
Following an early heat wave last month that left much of the country sweltering, President Biden on Tuesday proposed new rules to protect workers from dangerous heat.
When disaster strikes, there are no red states or blue states. I've demonstrated that. I said no matter whether you vote for him or not, everyone's going to get treated fairly.
The administration is trying to require employers to monitor workers and provide rest areas and water when the heat index reaches 80 degrees or higher. Last year, the hottest in recorded history, brought over 2,000 heat-related fatalities in the U.S.
We're going to face this summer. It's going to be significant.
And that marks President Biden's first policy event since last week. The White House says the president is getting out there to speak to the American public as he's seeking to, quote, turn the page from last week's debate.
We understand the concerns. We get it. The president did not have a great night. The president had a cold. He had a hoarse voice. We want to turn the page on this. And we want to turn the page for the American people as well, because we know that they need to see him out there.
The White House announced that this week Biden will meet with Democratic leaders, campaign in Wisconsin, and do a sit-down interview with ABC. He's also holding a press conference at a Nato summit next week in D.C. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
Next, a roundup of upcoming Supreme Court cases. The nation's highest court today agreeing to review the FDA's regulations for e-cigarettes. The industry has come under fire for the product's popularity among young people. A study last year showed that roughly 2.1 million children used e-cigarettes regularly, mostly the flavored products. Meanwhile, the Supreme Court said it will also take on a lawsuit over Texas's age verification requirements for adult websites. The websites challenged the requirements on First Amendment grounds. A lower court upheld the law in March, saying Texas had a, quote, legitimate interest in preventing minors' access to pornography. Lastly, the Supreme Court has declined to hear several challenges to a gun ban in Illinois. This leaves the law in place while lower courts decide the cases. The Pentagon today pledging to send Ukraine another $2 billion worth of weapons. Meanwhile, Russia's top EU ally is in Kyiv, advocating for peace in Ukraine. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pastar has the war update.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin met his Ukrainian counterpart on Tuesday. Austin says the U.S. is soon going to announce $2.3 billion in new security assistance for Ukraine.
So make no mistake,
Watch.
Ukraine is not alone, and the United States will never waver in our support.
Austin says the package will provide Ukraine with more air defense interceptors, anti-tank weapons, and other critical munitions. It will also enable the United States to secure more Patriot NASAMS air defense interceptors, which will be sent to Ukraine. NATO allies are currently getting ready for a major summit in Washington. U.S. officials will bring up a topic which is top of mind for many Ukrainians.
Now, as we look ahead to the NATO summit next week, Rustam, we'll take steps to build a bridge to NATO membership for Ukraine.
An announcement Austin's counterpart from Ukraine appreciates.
Hopefully, soon Ukraine will receive its invitation.
On that note, Secretary of State Antony Blinken met Ukraine's head of the presidential office on Tuesday. They spoke about a number of issues, such as
allies' intention to bring Ukraine closer to NATO membership.
They also discussed Ukraine's defense and energy resiliency. Also on Tuesday, Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban was in Kyiv, urging Ukraine to accept a ceasefire deal with Russia.
A ceasefire connected to a deadline would give a chance to speed up peace talks.
The State Department responded, saying the U.S. and NATO don't think Ukraine should accept a Russian deal.
Have been clear that there really is only one solution here, and that is the Russian Federation simply leaving Ukrainian territory.
Orban is close to Russia and has often opposed more EU funding for Ukraine in the past. While in Kyiv on Tuesday, he pointed out that he now wants to improve the relationship between Hungary and Ukraine. He said the meeting could serve as a basis for a future bilateral agreement between the two countries. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
The Department of Homeland Security deported a group of illegal Chinese immigrants over the weekend. They were reportedly sent back home in the first large charter flight since 2018. In a statement, DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas said the U.S. will continue to enforce its immigration laws. Obtaining a U.S. visa has become increasingly difficult in China, and the aftermath of the regime's COVID-19 lockdown has prompted a large number of Chinese nationals to flee. Many of them chose to enter the U.S. illegally through the southern and northern borders. Customs and Border Protection reports that it has encountered nearly 56,000 Chinese migrants at the border in the current fiscal year. The U.S. is cracking down on companies that train China's military forces. Two of the firms are in China, two in the UAE, one in South Africa, and another in the UK. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has more from the State Department.
Authorities say that these companies have been tied to training the Chinese military using Western and NATO sources. These companies are put on the trade restriction list and will likely be banned from importing U.S. goods and technology. It's meant to stop sensitive American goods and tech from falling into the wrong hands. Authorities say one of the companies in the UAE was shipping U.S. goods straight to Russia. All of this comes amid another region, which is China's unrestricted warfare on the U.S., specifically fentanyl.
Much of the fentanyl that's coming into this country is the product of perfectly legal chemicals or precursors being manufactured halfway around the world in China, being sent close to our borders in Mexico, and then being diverted and synthesized into an opioid that comes in and kills Americans.
But the bipartisan House Select Committee on the CCP found that the Chinese regime is subsidizing these fentanyl precursors through tax incentives.
The CCP is subsidizing the manufacturing and export of fentanyl precursors through tax incentives. Have you raised this concern with those officials?
When we're talking about fentanyl precursors, that continues to be something that we continue to raise in every engagement that we have with officials in the PRC.
As U.S. officials continue to press the Chinese regime on these issues, we'll keep you updated on what comes out. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Jack Bradley, NTD News.
Washington, D.C. is gearing up for heightened security next week as world leaders are set to arrive for NATO's annual summit. The military alliance is expected to announce new actions to support Ukraine and the appointment of a new Secretary General. NTD's Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has more on this story.
The mayor of D.C. and the FBI warned Washingtonians of heightened levels of security next week. The leaders of 32 NATO member states and 5 other nations will participate in the military alliance's annual summit, which will span from July 9th through the 11th.
And the summit has been designated a national special security event.
Let me put it simply. Next week is not going to be a regular week in D.C. We anticipate the summit will increase traffic throughout the city.
It should be lost on no one that D.C. on a normal day is a target-rich environment for potential threat actors. As such, we would like to remind the public to remain vigilant and report any suspicious activity to law enforcement.
This year's summit marks the 75th anniversary of the military alliance, and one of its most important accomplishments in recent years is its increased investment in member capabilities.
At the summit in Washington, more support to Ukraine will be our most urgent task. I strongly welcome that this year a record of 23 allies, including France, will invest at least 2% of GDP on defense.
Since former President Donald Trump pressured NATO member states back in 2017 to fulfill the 2% GDP defense spending pledge, compliance has increased fourfold. And former President Trump reminded the American audience of this in last week's presidential debate.
And the only reason that he can play games with NATO is because I got them to put up hundreds of billions of dollars. I said, and he's right about this, I said, no, I'm not going to support NATO if you don't pay.
Mark Rutte, former Dutch Prime Minister, will replace Jens Stoltenberg as NATO's new Secretary General. And NATO is set to announce a new plan to coordinate assistance to Ukraine. Some 700 allied troops, including U.S. service members, will be stationed in a military base in Germany to manage logistics. The U.S. is also expected to announce new air defense assistance to Ukraine. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Police report at least 116 people were killed by a stampede at a religious gathering in northern India today. The village is about 100 miles southeast of New Delhi, India's capital. A local official told an Indian news outlet that 116 people were killed. Initial reports indicate that over 15,000 people had gathered for the event, 3 times the approved amount. The crowd was reportedly rushing to leave a makeshift tent structure. Video of the aftermath shows the tent had collapsed. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Many people can't afford homes, especially in California. And many of the people who build the homes can't afford to live in them. Some local leaders in San Francisco share more on what's behind the high costs. NTD's David Lamb reports.
Some people are unhappy with how their city's situation is, such as the case with San Francisco and its homelessness and housing crisis.
It's cruel to see people living on the streets, so we are all for building housing for those individuals and get them off the streets. And we just want to make sure that our building trades workers don't get left out when they're building that house. Our building trades workers should be building that housing, and those jobs shouldn't be shipped out to other parts of the state or the country or the world.
Former interim mayor Mark Farrell says the city needs much change and says he's eyeing to focus on labor.
First of all, to focus on public safety and cleaning up the streets. When you do that, you create an environment where companies, employees might want to come back.
Tax credits are currently available for certain businesses that open physical locations. To boost economic growth, Farrell pointed to tax incentives from 2010.
To actually encourage companies to relocate back to San Francisco, to encourage employers to mandate that their employees come to work at least 4 days a week.
In addition to property, residents also complained about the standard of living.
What I hear from merchants and residents in Chinatown every single day, we need public safety. We need to clean up the streets. We need to make sure the drug crisis isn't spilling out into every single neighborhood. And we actually address it and make a difference inside of City Hall.
This year, crime has become a top issue in the state, with lawmakers introducing bills to curb crime rates. On Monday, California's governor announced new measures to tackle theft and fentanyl narcotics. David Lamb, NTD News.
Staying with California, Governor Gavin Newsom and state lawmakers are proposing a ballot initiative to reform Proposition 47. The law in 2014 cut prison sentences by reducing some drug and theft crimes from felonies to misdemeanors. But now Newsom says reforms are needed to crack down on crime and the fentanyl crisis to protect local communities. New York City Mayor Eric Adams is promising $2 billion to affordable and public housing. The investment is part of the city's 2025 fiscal year budget. NTD's Fiona G has more.
Last week, Speaker Adams and I passed an unprecedented budget during difficult times, $112.4 billion that we were able to pass. We dealt with the issues of the sunsetting of COVID dollars to keep in place necessary programs, $53 million in our cultural institutions, $58 million in our libraries.
The Adams administration plans to invest $26 billion in housing over 10 years. It also plans to build 500,000 new homes by 2032. At a press conference earlier today, the mayor praised the budget.
And I'm creating a fiscally sound city. So no matter what the uncertainties are, if it's another COVID, if it's another migrants, if it's another this or that, that we can still run as a city.
After protests, $100 million was given to early childhood education. Another $20 million will create seats for 3-year-olds in preschool, known as 3K. But the budget is not without its critics. Childcare organizations say the budget still makes unnecessary cuts that put financial strain on working-class parents. Other New Yorkers protest the use of tax dollars on illegal immigrant housing. 3 New York City Democratic Socialist Council members also oppose the $11 billion allocated to the NYPD. But Adams reiterated his commitment to supporting the city's police force.
The best reform we could have is people being safe. Because the loudest may talk about disbanding, defunding, removing police department, but that's not what I hear from New Yorkers.
Fiona G, NTD News.
The U.S. Marshals Service says it found 200 missing children through Operation We Will Find You Too. This includes sex trafficking victims, abused children, and runaways in a 6-week nationwide operation. Among the children found, 173 were endangered runaways and 25 were classified as otherwise missing. The youngest child was a 5-month-old baby. U.S. Marshals carried out the operation from May 20th to June 24th, along with federal, state, and local agencies. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children offered technical assistance in the operation. It is the second such nationwide missing child operation. The Department of Justice says it focused on geographical areas with large clusters of critically missing children. Exploited foreign workers were reportedly found making handbags for luxury brands Armani and Dior. Italian investigators found production costs to be far lower than retail prices.
Italian investigators, while raiding factories, discovered exploited foreign workers making luxury bags for Armani and Dior. These luxury brands are known for high quality, sophisticated designs, and premium pricing. Simple handbags can sell for as much as $9,000. Investigators found that a Dior handbag priced at $2,700 costs roughly $57 to assemble. NTD reached out to Armani and Dior but did not hear back before airtime. Workers allegedly lived, slept, and ate at the workshop, working from dawn until after 9 p.m. That's including weekends and holidays. And to increase productivity, machines didn't have safety devices, according to prosecutors. Workers said they were paid the equivalent of $2 to $3 an hour. Luxury brands have high price tags partly because consumers expect skilled workers to make the products in professional workshops. But in actuality, many outsource production. These suppliers may face charges, but Armani and Dior will not.
Joining me now to discuss the delay in Trump's sentencing are two guests. Jacqueline Goodman is a criminal defense attorney, and Dante Mills, a trial attorney and founding partner at Mills and Edwards LLP. Thank you both so much for joining us tonight. Now, Dante, you practice law in New York. What do you make of Judge Juan Merchan's decision to delay Trump's sentencing following the Supreme Court's ruling on presidential immunity?
Good afternoon, Tiffany. I think that's the right move. I've practiced in front of Judge Merchan specifically
And he's very careful and thoughtful to make the right decision and not rush into the wrong decision. And I think the right decision here is to let the issues be flushed out about the Supreme Court's decision and determine whether or not what the Supreme Court decided, if it affects the Manhattan case and that verdict. If it does, then they may have to start over. If it turns out that that Supreme Court decision does not impact the Manhattan conviction, then he can move to sentencing and proceed forward as he normally would. There's no reason to rush this thing and get it wrong. You don't want to do that, especially with the high-profile case with the former president.
And Jacqueline, how do you see Trump's legal team moving forward on this case?
Well, I'll tell you, the ramifications of this are just astounding, right? The very least of it is that this allows, with respect to the other cases, a unified defense strategy that didn't exist before. So this idea that a former president could be immune for any actions that were occurring at the time that he was president or related to any official act really opens the door wide open with respect to not only the defenses in the cases, but also in the admissibility of evidence. And they have to go through all of it with a brand new fine-tooth comb to ensure that no evidence is coming into these trials, including the hush money trial, that might have been excluded as a result of this ruling. So the ramifications, the ripple effect is just profound. We're just really talking about the tip of the iceberg here.
And
some people may think, Tiffany, just looking at this case, it happened, meaning this hush money case, the circumstances happened before Donald Trump was president. So that immunity would not apply to the facts of that. However, during the trial, some contact information and some communication between then President Trump and some of his aides came into that hush money trial. So that specifically is what may be off limits. And if that can't be introduced during a trial, they may have to do the trial over, or the judge can say, yes, that information came in, but it didn't impact the outcome, right? It wasn't meaningful enough to impact the outcome, so I'm going to let this verdict stand and we'll move on to sentencing. So there are some things that have to be flushed out, even though this case happened in New York before Donald Trump became president.
And Dante, expanding on that, the sentencing has been delayed until September. That's after the RNC. What do you make of the timing of that?
Well, I think there's a chance that it benefits former President Donald Trump, because there are some people who may think that this verdict may get overturned. And if they were on the fence for voting for him because of those convictions, now they're back in play. So if there were some people saying, because he was convicted, I can never vote for him, now those voters are back in play. However, there's a group of Donald Trump supporters who were really energized by the fact that they're saying these criminal prosecutions happen. Now that energy is gone. So I think it can work both ways for former President Donald Trump. But they'll try and capitalize off of it and say he's not, these convictions will be overturned. So don't hold these convictions against him and vote for him as you normally would.
On that note, Jacqueline, Judge Juan Merchan said Trump will be sentenced on September 18th, quote, if such is still necessary. Is there a chance the case could get tossed out by then?
Yeah, the defense is making a motion to really toss that case out, to say that this conviction can't stand. The real more likely result is that they have a new trial if one is to be had. Again, all of these things really depend on the timing. We have an election that's happening in the background, and the question is, as a practical matter, can that retrial happen before the election, before Donald Trump is seated as the president, in which case the prosecution wouldn't go forward then. So these delays, of course, are just manna from heaven for the Donald Trump voters and for Donald Trump in respect to his campaign. So, you know, the delay right now is to mid-September, but one can easily foresee that that might go on for some time and maybe forever.
And on that note, Dante, looking ahead, what about Trump's 3 other criminal cases? It seems like none of those will make it to trial before the election. How does the presidential immunity ruling impact those cases?
Well, that's how it impacts them. And Tiffany, you're absolutely right. If those cases, those federal cases don't make it to trial and former President Trump wins this re-election, once he's president, he has the right to tell the Justice Department to drop those cases. But This state case in New York, he would not have the authority to do that. So if former President Trump is elected, all of those cases, except this case in New York, could potentially go away, which means he was able to avoid criminal prosecution simply by delaying long enough for it not to be able to happen.
On that note, Jacqueline, how do you see these cases playing out, including this New York one?
You really have to look at it all brand new. Again, this is a unified strategy now across all of these cases for the defense. This is something to leverage in every possible way, not only for the substantive cases themselves, but also for the admission of any piece of evidence. And so that's even true for the New York hush money case. There may be admitted evidence into that case that really shouldn't have been admitted given this new ruling. So all of the cases now have to be looked at brand new. And really, I think the delay is the issue here. I think delay. And it worked, I think, to Donald Trump's advantage.
Dante, from
but
a
I think
political...
that theme there, Tiffany, I think that theme is right. I think the Supreme Court said if you are going to bring it or try to bring a criminal case against a sitting president or former president, there has to be some scrutiny. You don't want any prosecutor in America just being able to charge a former president. So the Supreme Court, in their ruling, they set a test and said it has to be decided if they were acting within their presidential powers. And if they were, you can't touch them. You can't second guess that. So all of these cases are going to be impacted. That's clear. But I think it's the right thing, maybe not specifically for Donald Trump, but just for the position of the president, so that the president is not afraid to make decisions in office and afraid that if they make the wrong decision, they're going to be prosecuted. I think it's best that we now have this test where you have to show that this was egregious activity, that it was outside the scope of the presidency, or there's going to be some immunity or protection for the president to act in his duty.
On the scrutiny
that
part,
is what the majority said. But, you know, reading Sotomayor's dissent, it's really clear that, and it's interesting, I think the defense is going to have to glom on to Sotomayor's dissent as she's talking about what happens in the nth degree. Where do we take this? What happens when we take this to its logical end? Political rivals can be killed, and if that is something that a president can make a case for, that it was during an official act or something in some way was officially part of his duties as president, or, you know, all of the what ifs, immune, military coups, selling secrets, all of those things that might have been connected to some kind of official act are now immune according to this dissent and probably according to the decision. And so I think it's going to be a matter of time before we find out whether this is really something that is good for democracy. Clearly the majority thinks so, and clearly 3 of the justices don't.
I think the Supreme Court doesn't want to jump in and impact what a president does. That's not their role. And they talked about in the majority decision, the separation of powers. As president, you should have the ability to act in your presidential authority without people overlooking you and saying, well, I think he shouldn't have done this, so I'm going to try and charge him for it criminally. That's what they wanted to rule against. Now it's up to the voters to vote in somebody that you believe is not going to take advantage of that power. But that's the voters to do, and not for the Supreme Court to kind of sit as the overseers or the watchers of every decision that a president makes. And they did say, in times there's a presumptive immunity, which means it's not absolute immunity at all. It's presumptive, but if a prosecutor can show that something was egregious or crossed the line, they have the right to do that. But there's a presumed immunity, not absolute immunity.
Dante Mills and
I think
Jacqueline
that egregious
Goodman,
and cross the
that
line
we do have
it's actually
to...
not in the decision, but I agree with you. That is essentially the part and parcel of what the majority is saying. The problem with that is that it did give a sea change to what was otherwise the rule, and that was that a president was constrained by the law. No president was above the law. And now we've given them, you know, we've sort of emboldened not only the president, but really the executive branch. And so there's going to be other questions about how far does this go? Like every other Supreme Court decision, we take it and see where those boundaries really are with respect to this rule. And so others are going to be arguing that they are effectively the agent of the president, et cetera, and they will be seeking that same type of immunity. It is really a very profound and meaningful decision, and really only time will tell as to what the constraints are on the presidential power based on this decision.
All right, fascinating discussion. Jacqueline Goodman and Dante Mills, thank you both so much.
Thank you for having me.
In related legal news, former mayor and prosecutor Rudy Giuliani has been disbarred. This comes following 2 indictments over his role in challenging the results of the 2020 presidential election. New York State's First Department Appeals Court said his disbarment is effective immediately. Early this year, Giuliani and other allies of former President Trump were indicted in Arizona for challenging the 2020 election results in that state. He was also indicted with other Trump allies in the Georgia RICO case. Giuliani pleaded not guilty in both cases. The former New York City mayor also had his law license suspended in Washington, D.C. U.S. job openings unexpectedly grew in May, and the sales slump continues at Tesla. Here's NTD's Dawn Ma with today's Business Matters.
Thank you very much. The number of available jobs in the U.S. unexpectedly grew in May. So job openings rose slightly to 8.1 million, according to the Labor Department Tuesday. And an economist at the Navy Federal Credit Union says that the report was another sign that the labor market is holding firm and the expansion looks solid. So the U.S. economy and job market as well have been remarkably resilient in the face of the Federal Reserve's campaign to raise interest rates to rein in inflation. The Fed hiked its benchmark rate 11 times in 2022 and 2023, lifting it to a 23-year high. In other news, bad ones, that is, for Tesla, the electric automaker's sales took a hit for the second straight quarter. Sales for the second quarter came in at nearly 444,000. That's a 5% drop from a year ago. It's the first time Tesla has posted a consecutive year-over-year decline in the number of vehicles sold. But sales were still stronger than some analysts had predicted, and it was enough to beat out Chinese automaker BYD to retain the lead position in global sales of purely electric vehicles. And it's your last chance to get Forever stamps at their current price. A first-class Forever stamp will soon cost 73 cents. This is a nickel more than the current 68 cents. Prices for other services are also increasing, including postcards and metered letters. The new price hikes will take effect on July 14th, and the hikes are part of the UPS's 10-year Delivering for America plan. It's expected to generate $44 billion in additional revenue by 2031. All right, that's all from me. Back to you.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer now for your sports news. We're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, the Boston Celtics are up for sale just 2 weeks after winning the NBA title. What kind of price tag can we expect with them?
You know, if they sell their entire share, it's probably $5 billion. I mean, they were just valued by Forbes last year at $4.7 billion. But you know, there's only 30 of these teams around. They don't come up for sale very often. Of course, what billionaire doesn't want his own sports team, especially with the way franchise values have gone up over the years. You know, to it, this ownership group purchased the team back in 2002 for just $360 million, so that'll be a very good return on investment. Now, certainly this is the way most sports franchises are trending, which is up. But the NBA's franchise values especially took off in 2011. This is after the owners got a very favorable collective bargaining agreement with the players that split the revenue 50-50 all the way down the middle. Previously, the players got 57% to 43%. Now, for the Celtics, it also doesn't hurt that they've won more titles than anybody else. So this is one of the premier franchises in the league.
Given that, how much success or failure is an owner responsible for? How much do they really impact their team?
You know, I think it's a lot more than people realize, because you don't always see them. Obviously, they're not on the court or coaching the team, but success is really always from the top down. For instance, when this ownership group bought the Celtics, they soon hired Danny Ainge to be in charge of player personnel. This is 2003. It turned out to be an excellent move. Ainge was a superb talent evaluator. He built up assets by drafting well for several years. Then he went all in 2007, traded most of those parts for All-Stars Kevin Garnett and Ray Allen to team with All-Star Paul Pierce. A year later, they won the NBA title with those three leading the way. And then when their run was over in 2013, he traded Pierce and Garnett to the Nets for draft picks and future pick swaps. And he turned those into Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, who were the two cornerstones for the team that just won the NBA title. So this is a well-run franchise from the top down.
And moving to soccer news, the U.S. was eliminated in the group stage of the Copa America last night. This is after losing 1-0 to Uruguay. What's been the reaction to this?
Well, some disappointment for sure. Expectations were much higher. It seemed like they had a very favorable group with the low-ranked teams, Panama and Bolivia, that most thought the U.S. would win, especially since it was played right here. Bolivia they beat, Panama they didn't. And really all they had to do was finish in the top two of their 4-team group to advance the knockout stages. So that didn't happen, and now you have to wonder if any changes are going to be made to the team, and particularly their coach, Greg Berhalter. Now, I'll grant there were some unusual calls that went against them last night, and meanwhile against Panama, I mean, they lost one of their better players to a red card in just the 18th minute. So they were down a man the rest of the game. But if you want to be a top team, you've either got to avoid those situations or know how to overcome them. They didn't either. So it's back to the drawing board for the U.S. They've got pretty much 2 years to right this ship for the World Cup, which is played right here in the U.S.
Well, over in England, Wimbledon is underway with first-round matches continuing today. Now, one player you were curious to see was Novak Djokovic, given his relative struggles. How did he fare?
Well, he was very dominant today. He won 6-1, 6-2, 6-2 over unseeded Vit Kopriva, nearly doubling him total points. So if you're rooting for him, this is the kind of match you want to see him have. Now, Djokovic was a question mark to play in this tournament at all, after having to retire from the French Open with a knee injury just a few weeks ago. And like you said, he really hasn't had a Djokovic-like season, no titles or even finals appearances at any of his tournaments. Meanwhile, his biggest rivals in this tournament all won their first-round matches as well. We're talking Carlos Alcaraz, Jannik Sinner, Alexander Zverev. Now, on the women's side, as I mentioned yesterday, this is wide open. You have the top two ranked players, that's Iga Swiatek and Coco Gauff. Neither one has had much success on this grass court. That could be part of it. It's the only major that's played on the grass court. But those two won their first-round matches as well to advance to the second round.
Well, Dave, as always, thanks for joining us.
Well, thanks, Tiff.
With teammates younger than his son, Andy McDonald prepares for an Olympic debut as the oldest skateboarder in Paris. But the 50-year-old great reckons he can still teach them a trick or two.
Andy McDonald was announced Monday as a teammate to world champion Sky Brown, age 15, and Lola Tambling, 16. The first male skateboarder to represent Britain at a Games is unfazed by the age gap, but amazed to have gotten so far.
It feels pretty surreal. It was a long shot for me to get to this point. I never thought that I would actually qualify for the Games when I started this process 2.5 years ago.
He secured his berth at the last chance in a qualifier in Budapest last week. McDonald feels he has something to offer, can learn something in return.
I have an advantage in that I have obviously much more experience in skating in competition and what it takes to mentally prepare, physically prepare.
He is also a father of 2 daughters and a son. His daily routine has been one of school runs, homework, and after-class activities, as well as skateboarding.
From the get-go, it was always like, can you do this? Can you be an Olympic athlete and still be the dad and like the most important things, raising my kids. So I've been able to do both. So that's, for me, the biggest accomplishment.
McDonald is a record holder for most X Games medals in vert skateboarding, competing with American greats Tony Hawk and Shaun White.
Living in a big city can sometimes be a real challenge. The endless concrete, the hustle and bustle, and all the noise. But hidden within many urban centers is an island of respite for the heart and mind. NTD's Dana Monahan speaks with Kathy Walker about the wonder of community gardens.
Kathy Walker is president of the American Community Garden Association. Walker says in Georgia, they grow all kinds of healthy goodies year-round. In summer, it's stuff like tomatoes, peppers, green beans, and basil. In wintertime, green leafy vegetables. The enthusiastic gardener says there are over 400 community gardens tucked away in the city, full of diversity.
There's many nationalities in the garden. And I always say, Mother Nature doesn't know the color of our skin. So when we're all in the garden, we're happy and we're growing.
Walker says it's important for people to grow their own food.
We encourage people to know where their food comes from, especially the youth. whoever controls your food control you. So we want to control ourselves. So that's why you gotta grow your own.
The Garden Association president says that eating fresh vegetables and fruit leads to a healthy body.
We can deter a lot of these high blood pressures, diabetes. We can deter a lot of that by just eating healthy food. If they plant it and they take care of it and they harvest it, they're more apt to eat it.
The enthusiastic gardener says it's important for people to live their best life. A big key to that, she says, is a mind at peace.
It's just relaxation. It takes all the stress off of you when you got your hands in the dirt. A lot of times I find like it's good to take your shoes off and connect with the earth barefoot. You want to feel that soil go between your toes and everything.
Walker says a community garden is a gift that just keeps on giving.
A community garden is a safe place to bring your family, your kids, and to just socialize with your neighbors. You know, have your neighborhood meetings, have little barbecues.
Transforming unused spaces, according to Walker, can also heal areas of a city that are hurting.
It actually lowers crime in the neighborhood because if a lot of community gardens, they're on vacant lots where it was a lot of like crime going on, and it was turned into a community garden.
Occasionally, Walker says, a community garden may encounter someone who steals the efforts of their hard work. But such hiccups along the way don't deter Walker. She believes the power of people getting together and growing is transformational.
If you get all of us community gardeners together, we can change the world.
So you heard it from Kathy, everyone. A healthy mind and body through gardening. All you need to get started is a patch of soil, sun, seeds, and water. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.